Hi, I'm Ryan Szymanski, curator for Battleship New Jersey Museum and Memorial. Today we've got another video answering a question. This time, a viewer emailed it in to us. This was a question that was asked on the website Quora, and it's sort of opinion-based, so it's not, maybe Quora is not the best platform for that, but this viewer forwarded it on to us and was like, hey, I usually answer Iowa Class Battleship questions on there, but I don't know the answer to this. What do you think? The question is, with all 4 Iowa Class battleships seeing active service lives, which one received the least amount of upgrades? So there's a couple of different ways that this question could be answered. And of course, no matter which way you answer it, it's going to be a different Iowa Class battleship. So, assuming they mean which one was the least modern, or is currently the least modern, I would say Battleship New Jersey. New Jersey received a number of upgrades in the 1960s during her Vietnam commission, and then when she was brought back into service in the 80s, they left a lot of that stuff in place. And she also being the first one brought back, they did the least amount of work to her to get her back as quickly as possible. And so the other battleships got more during their modernizations and more modern stuff. So the real obvious feature of this is Battleship New Jersey's O10 level, the superstructure, has the T-shaped superstructure for the electronics countermeasures equipment that was installed, while the other ships have the much more aerodynamic shape built around. So that's just one of many things. So Battleship New Jersey, in that instance, received the fewest number of upgrades. However, she probably received the most instances of being upgraded over her career, because she's the only one brought back during the Vietnam War. And like the other ships, she saw upgrades in the 50s, she saw upgrades in the 40s, and she saw upgrades in the 60s and 80s. If you are looking at which one spent the least amount of time at sea or has the least use on her and therefore had the least yard periods and everything else, well, then the answer to that is probably Wisconsin. She saw the least amount of time at sea of all of the Iowas. She was the last one brought back in the 80s. She was among the last ones in commission. She was commissioned a little bit before Missouri, but she made it to World War II pretty late on. Missed most of the 80s. She wasn't commissioned until 88, so 6 years after New Jersey. And so she probably went into the yard a smaller number of times than the other battleships, just because she was only active for about 12 years, whereas New Jersey was active for about 22 years across the same 5-decade span. That said, Wisconsin's yard period in the 80s was the most in-depth of all of them, and I would say she is the most modern of the Iowa Class battleships because of that. Being commissioned 6 years later than New Jersey, a lot of her equipment are more new marks and mods than New Jersey's. With New Jersey, they tried to refurbish a lot of what was there. With Wisconsin, they gutted and cut out a lot of stuff, like including superstructure decks, and just enclosed things and installed things in a whole new way. She even got a whole new wood deck, while the other 3 Iowas retained some of their original wood deck and only replaced certain individual rotten boards. So in that case, Wisconsin is definitely not the answer. Which one had the fewest number of instances of being modernized? The answer to that, I would say, is probably Missouri, because she and Wisconsin are brought into service at the end of World War II, after the other 2. So Iowa and New Jersey have major yard periods during World War II where they alter significant features of the ship. The bridge, electronics, masts, things like that. And Wisconsin and Missouri more or less make these changes while under construction, and so they don't have those sorts of upgrades during their service lives. Missouri alone remains in commission in 1950, when the others have been decommissioned in the later 40s. And so the other three have a major yard period right before the Korean War starts, and to reactivate the ships. And Missouri doesn't have that. And then she's decommissioned in 1955 because at that point she has the most steaming time on her. And the other Iowas aren't decommissioned for another couple of years after that, during which time the other three get the Project Katy nuclear shells and those handling arrangements installed. Wisconsin and Iowa get a new style of mast with new cranes and things added for the mainmast back aft. So there are some major changes that happen in the 50s that Missouri misses out on. Then, of course, New Jersey is the only one brought back in the 60s. And then when Missouri is brought back in 86, she gets almost as good a treatment as Wisconsin in 88, but not quite as much done. So, depending on how this question is being asked, what the original poster is wondering, you could answer it a couple different ways. The short answer is all of these ships are heavily, heavily modified from their World War II configuration. If one is more in their World War II configuration than any of the others, it is by a very minute amount. So if that's really what the original questioner had in mind, and none of these ships are particularly close to their World War II configuration. We're in after main battery plot right now, around a lot of the equipment that, though the ship was modernized heavily throughout her career, most of this stuff stays the exact same. So we've got the original Mark 8 fire control computer, an old electromechanical analog computer from the 1930s. This was never replaced with a modern digital computer. So key spaces like engineering and fire control spaces are more or less in their World War II equipment setups. But no one ship is significantly more close to their World War II or as-built configuration than any of the other ones. They've all been seriously, seriously modernized over the course of 40 or more years. Not how I interpret the original poster's question, but some interesting information for you guys who are interested enough in it to be watching this. Do any of the museums interpret their vessels more like the as-built configuration than the others? All four of us interpret the Iowa Class Battleships in their final configurations because that's how we got the ship. So all four Iowas are interpreted as if it is like around roughly 1990 as our period of interpretation, give or take a year or two. So that's when these ships did their last cruises, when they participated in their last wars, those sorts of things. And that's the condition we got the ship in. So to alter it to another time period would be far too difficult, and you'd be destroying historic fabric to backfit it with a facsimile to appear like older historic fabric. So none of the four Iowa Class battleships have done this to a large degree. That said, we've all done it to some degree. I'm not going to speak too much on what the other Iowas do, but on Battleship New Jersey, there are a couple of spaces that we have intentionally backdated to look like their World War II configuration. We chose to do this if the space was significant during an earlier time period, if the space had been destroyed, altered, or was in some other way unusable in its 1980s, 90s configuration, and if we were able to. So, for example, on this ship, we have a stateroom that is converted to look like it was part of the World War II Admiral's Suite. This stateroom was severely damaged by water intrusion, where the deck overhead leaked, so it destroyed a lot of the 1980s features in there. This space was a guest cabin, so it wasn't associated with any member of the ship's crew, and we had a bunch of World War II fittings and things that we had stripped off of other vessels over the course of Navy open houses and things like that. So we could just as easily make this space look like it would have during World War II as during the 1980s. Likewise, the World War II radio room. The Navy gutted all the original equipment from there. This was a really significant space. The ship acted as a flagship, so a lot of important communications went in and out of that space. And it was used like that as the ship's primary radio room during World War II, Korea, Vietnam. And it was only in the 80s that they gutted it and changed the location. And so we are currently in the process of backdating that fully to how it would have looked during World War II with completely operable radio equipment. Most of the Iowa Class battleships have acquired 40 millimeter or 20 millimeter guns, which were our World War II anti-aircraft battery. So we have one or two of each on display on the ship. Other ones have them on the grounds. I think it's Missouri has interpreted their Geedunk as if it's the 1950s. I imagine that's just they had a bunch of 1950s like concession stuff, and that's why they chose that period instead of any other. But like Iowa interprets the captains in port cabin and some of the other spaces as if it was FDR's cabin, which it was for a couple of weeks in, was it 1943 or 1944, when the ship was taking FDR to one of the conferences. So again, they used a similar criteria to us. It had a significance for a historically significant individual. It wasn't too difficult to backdate it to that appearance. So it made sense for them to do it. So not knowing how many conversions like that have happened on the 4 Iowas, I can't say for sure which of us have backdated the most rooms. There was an interesting discussion on Missouri early on. Her disc cone cage antenna at the bow was pretty badly wasted out. They removed it to do work on a pier side, and there was a lot of discussion of should they leave it removed to make the ship's silhouette appear more like it would have during World War II, or should they reinstall it? And it took them a number of years to come to an answer there, and in this instance they have replaced it or replicated it in some way to restore her to her 1990s configuration. Who are we to say that these ships' World War II services are more important than the Gulf War services or the Vietnam War services? As historians, I guess we've got more of a right than anyone to say what's the most historic time period, but is that really a decision that someone like me can make on behalf of everyone? I don't know. Those sorts of questions keep me up at night. So what do you think was the most historically significant time period for the Iowas? Do you think they should have never reactivated and changed these ships after World War II and just left them in those original configurations? Or do you think it was worthwhile to keep bringing them back over the course of the next 4 decades and therefore have to modernize the equipment that they're using and alter the ship's original appearance? Let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. I don't monitor Quora that often. I don't answer questions on there or go on that website. So if you have questions about Iowa Class battleships, be sure to message or comment on any of our social media pages directly instead of going through other websites like Quora that we don't monitor. Battleship New Jersey receives operating support from the New Jersey Department of State, also from a number of other businesses and private individuals like yourselves. We really appreciate your support. It allows us to take the time to answer these sorts of questions. And there's a link in the description below if you'd like to donate to continue helping the museum. You can also support us by liking, sharing, and subscribing so more people find out about the museum and our channel. Thanks for watching.